Where's Walter? It's the representation station, and I am your host, Jeff Mayhew. I am here with a very special guest tonight, Kyle Sweetser. He is a former Republican, now Democrat, running for Senate in Alabama. As you know, I am Jeff Mayhew. I am your host. We're missing our crew tonight. We've got some travel going on, and we've got a special guest. We wanted to give a little bit more time to kind of dive into the issues. So it's just going to be me and Kyle tonight. And Kyle, thank you for joining us tonight. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
I'm good. So how does somebody like you end up running for Senate as a Democrat? Tell me a little bit about your journey.
I'm a Mobile, Alabama native. I lived in Mobile, Alabama, the majority of my life, pretty much all of my life. And you know, I growing up, I grew up in construction, and I grew up kind of in and out of all types of communities. Working with my dad in the past, and on weekends when I was a kid and a teenager, and so over in 2016, I thought that Trump would be somebody that might shake things up in the state of Alabama, because working here and living here, and a lot of folks here, they don't have any hope. And so when somebody came along and looked, uh, like they would shake the system up, I backed them out the gate. I backed him in the primary. I voted for him in the general election in 2016, and by 2018, though, I realized something was seriously wrong when I got to see the effects of tariffs and how they actually work, with finished steel products and construction going up, and in some cases going up more than the tariff price. Going in and out of people's houses, though, really post 2018, listening to how people had changed under Donald Trump, or felt emboldened, kind of had to have a license to be bad, was startling to me. Felt like Donald Trump was tearing the fabric of our society apart. Um, and by 2020, I was pretty much done with the GOP. But when January 6th, 2021 happened, I decided that I had to start actively speaking out. It was a calling. I couldn't even help myself. So I went straight into it, and got really loud. Ended up speaking at the Democratic National Convention. I spoke at Principles First, which is has center right and center left folks there that are very concerned with what's going on right now, and did some other public speaking. And after Donald Trump won, I knew that I couldn't stop, and I just kept going and rolled straight into Senate. And I'm here to give the people of Alabama a real option. We've had a one party Republican ruled state here for 15 years. We're last place in every area where it counts. And the Republicans in the past, they've run an anti-establishment message, which is ironic because they are the establishment. They have nowhere to go. So I'm going to make them own all their failures in our state. I'm going to work to rebuild the Democratic Party in the state of Alabama, so we don't have this one party system with no accountability in our government. Where I live, half the ballot is like unopposed Republicans every election cycle for the on the state level, and so that needs to change. I want to help inspire folks here in red states, here in Alabama, and across America. To come to the Democratic Party, and to come to the Democratic Party in an area where we're trying to represent the middle here. I'm trying to represent the common woman and man here, and all the folks that have been left behind, the folks that were left behind to such a degree that it led to someone like Donald Trump being elected. My website is kyleforalabama.com. If you want to check it out, you can also check me out across social media at Kyle for Alabama.
Yeah, so Kyle, I've been following you a little bit. I'm in Virginia, you're in Alabama, so you're not like big on my radar, obviously, because I can't vote for you. But um, I've been interested in what you're doing because I've heard you speak on some of the spaces with Chris Ryan, and I what from the few speeches that I've heard, what I can tell is somebody that is really dedicated to listening to voters. I would say that you've probably learned a lot on your campaign trail so far, my guess, and I'll let you talk about that a little bit too. And we were just talking a little bit before we got started about where you came from. You mentioned that, you're a contractor and you were talking about business and kind of how you saw things. And this is, that's probably what led you to voting for Donald Trump in the first place is you were looking for somebody to shake up the system because you felt like the system wasn't working, right? And he just isn't the guy, right? I think we can agree on that. But why don't you talk a little bit about your experience as a small business owner and what you saw with the economy and stuff that really led you to get activated in politics?
Yeah. So looking at things and how the price of goods were increased by tariffs specifically, talking about tariffs, looking at tariffs, that price gets passed down to the consumer. So who ends up paying for these tariffs are the people. And in places like Alabama, where we have less expendable income, they affect your customers. They affect your businesses even that can adapt that in some cases go out of business, but they affect so many people here in the state of Alabama negatively. And no one, well, this is post Trump, but sorry, I can't stay off of tariffs because they're so detrimental to Alabama.
Yeah.
But circling back, outside of tariffs, whenever Obama was running here, or whenever he was president, he mentioned something about potentially, or his administration about potentially putting regulation or stopping homeowners and businesses from building ponds, from digging a hole in the backyard, making a pond. That was sort of a part of his administration. You also had some push to move into regulating our waterways, like making it to where you couldn't build a pier in a waterway outside of your house, outside of your home. And so looking at those sort of things and looking at how government in the past had expanded, power and not, I'm not going to say in a nefarious way, but what ends up happening is that people that are our age or younger, they end up being just overwhelmed by what they perceive that they need. They
Mm.
don't, people think that you need 15 lawyers to start a plumbing business now. And it, for one, it's not true, but that's pretty much how we've been conditioned through our political system to just sort of accept certain things that, we view, I guess the population would generally view as would be about regulating larger businesses. But really, what ends up happening is a regulation ends up helping larger businesses because they're the only ones that can adapt. And then the smaller businesses get harmed because they just don't have the ability. They don't have a bunch of people sitting in an office to figure this stuff out. So, but that kind of leads into tariffs, and how with Trump, whenever they put these tariffs in place, a lot of folks said, "Oh, we'll give it a shot. It's a little different." And then when you start to see how it affects the economy, when you start to see how it affects individuals, just like what I was saying before, prior to Trump, then you start to realize that hey, the government or a party using the government in this way to rig the markets is not only bad for business, it's bad for innovation, and it's bad for pretty much everybody that's a consumer, unless you're ultra wealthy or you're in the 1% because you have more expendable income. So tariffs are regressive taxes, meaning that affects lower income Americans the most. So I want to be perfectly clear. I don't believe the government should be rigging markets in on the behalf of somebody's buddy because that's where we're at now. It's
Yeah.
it's hurting people. It's hurting the state of Alabama. It's hurting the people of Alabama.
Yeah, so you mentioned something in there like people are conditioned to kind of believe that this is the way, right? And we have a term for that on the show. We call that learned helplessness, right? You have been taught that this is the way that you have to do things and there is no other path. But there are other paths and getting involved politically, educating yourself, getting, building a group, speaking about the issues is one of the ways to kind of break that learned helplessness. So I'm glad that you're out there doing that. And, to your point about the regulations help the bigger businesses. I have a small business too, and it's definitely something that I've seen as well. I've also seen the tariff thing. I saw the tariff thing, way back in Trump's first administration, start to affect my business, before we've got to where we are now. And with the regulation is the big businesses pay for the lobbyists. The lobbyists write the legislation, they write the regulation, and they lobby the legislatures to pass the legislation. One of the things that we talk about here on the show, obviously, is we're talking about uncapping the House. If you increase the amount of legislators, it'll be harder for them to lobby a certain number to get their regulations passed. Moreover than that, it'll make it easier for small business owners to actually reach out and meet with their legislatures to let them know how those regulations are actually affecting them. Because, from my limited experience so far in the last 4 years, what I've learned is it's not necessarily that the people in Congress are bad per se, although I've been told that they're definitely bad people in Congress. But I think that more than anything, it's just they're misinformed. They're listening to a small group of people that are surrounding them, and they can't hear the rest of us. And by increasing the number, it'll make it easier for them to hear the everyday regular people like you and me.
Yeah, and I've looked at what y'all put out, and I think it's a great idea for handling this gerrymandering issue we have. Throw a little bit of controlled chaos in there to hopefully help represent more of the population that's not being represented.
That controlled chaos, it's kind of like the opposite of ordered liberty, but they're kind of the same thing, aren't they? Okay, so let me get to our first question tonight, our first serious question tonight. It's on your favorite topic. It's on Trump and it's on tariffs. It's Trump's tariffs are driving up fertilizer prices and cutting soybean exports, hurting American farmers. Congress has largely ceded trade authority to the executive. As senator, what would you do to reclaim that power to the legislative branch?
Look, Congress needs to take its full constitutional authority over tariffs again. There's a few acts over the years, I think two in the 70s, but and then there's one more that I know of. But we the way tariffs are being used, it's not conducive to American values. It's not conducive to what we know as our economy. Um, Looking at it and thinking about the United States and what the United States stands for, we now have, with tariffs, one man controlling our economy. Was not intended to be that way. We need to have representation from every state speaking on their concerns with tariffs and how the tariffs affect each individual state. When Trump mentioned Colombia tariffs, a lot of folks don't know. This was at the beginning of this administration. A lot of folks don't know, but one of our power plants here, well, the power plant here in Mobile, Alabama, it's mostly on natural gas now, but it does use coal. That coal comes from Colombia, and so there's so many little pieces with the way
Mhm.
that our economy is set up that, by the way, has helped us thrive and has helped us keep costs down. There's so many little pieces that need to be brought to the attention of, for one, the president in this case, but it really needs to go through Congress. We need to have this debate for tariffs through Congress. So, as I just said, when you have something like coal that powers your energy grid coming from another country, and there's no representation to put this debate out there, that's a major issue. We need to take that power back. We need to give the power back to Congress, which is going to give power back to the people. So I can return to my constituents. I can return to the state, and I can say, okay, how is this going to harm us? How is this going to help us? And then we have that discussion.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing is we need if we're going to take that power back, right? If Congress is going to reclaim that power from Congress, there needs to be a higher level of education about the issues. There needs to be more debate about the issues. I think right now we're kind of, we're angry. A lot of us are angry. We're frustrated. We're pointing fingers. But you mentioned something the intricacies of tariffs and how kind of the unknown things that people don't recognize. They're like, well, it doesn't really come from, I get this from America. And it's like, well, you do get it from America, but part of it it's imported, and that part is raising the cost, right? And so, and then like, just look at the farmers. I mean, you've got, I think I saw Senator Thune talking about how, he's got farmers that are basically going to be throwing soybeans in the trash, and they're not going to be able to sell them. It's wasted resources. It's wasted potential revenue. And I know that Trump is going to take our tariff money and give it to the farmers to like pay them off so they're not angry at them. But, I don't know if that's definitely not a long-term solution to the problem, I can tell you that. It may work for the midterms to get them through the midterms, but it's definitely not gonna work for the Republicans in the next cycle, and I doubt it'll work this cycle too, but, yeah, so I mean, I agree with you. I mean, there has to be that level of education, and I think in my co-host who's not here right now, Walter talks about it all the time, is that's what representation is. It's two-way education, right? Representatives have a responsibility to educate their constituents on the issues, not necessarily just point fingers and, recite talking points, but to actually sit down and have real debates, real conversations with them. So that's definitely good. I think overall, when you get to Congress, if you get to Congress, you're going to have to be creative in building coalitions. It's going to take votes to pull this power back, and you're going to be able to. You're going to. I think you might be in a unique position, being a former Republican, to be able to reach across the aisle and bring enough votes with you to the Democratic side to maybe pull this power back. Um, so, but since we're talking about finger pointing, let's get to our next question real quick. So the government is shut down for like I think like the 11th time in history. Which by the way, all recent history too. This didn't happen back in the past a lot. Um, and Republicans are pointing the finger at Democrats. Democrats are pointing the finger at Republicans. But still, it's really both their responsibility to fund the government. So, what would you do as a senator to mend the political divide and fulfill your constitutional duties of the office?
So both parties have become way too extreme. I'm going to do the hard thing, which is the right thing, and stand for the common sense middle, which is where most people are at. Right now, we've reached this point where we've got, two extremes basically controlling our country, and the people in the middle, which is the majority, they're just helpless. Um, so, look, first of all, we need to identify that we have an issue. Things are way too polarized. And we need to get away from it's not okay. We need to get away from that. The government shouldn't be shutting down. We should never get to this point. That means our government has failed us. Um, but look, you look at Democrats, you look at Republicans. Republicans, by far, are trampling the Constitution to a degree that I've never seen in my life. They are destroying the Constitution. You had Donald Trump who put out a tweet after he lost last time, along the lines that he wanted to terminate parts of the Constitution in order to stay in power. Those are the folks, him and JD Vance, that we have in power. They do not care for the Constitution. It gets in their way. It slows things down. So we, I acknowledge that both parties are extreme, but at the same time, we need to make sure that front and center, the Republican Party, if we let them, the MAGA Republican Party, will completely torch the Constitution. So we have to have, for one, we have to have Democrats and anti-MAGA folks that win elections. So we'll be able to stand up there and fight for the Constitution. Because right now, Republicans have abandoned their oath to the Constitution to bow down at the altar of Donald Trump, putting all the power in his hands, in one person's hands. And
So,
it was just not meant to. Yeah. But look, so simply put, we're this is like a coup. The Republicans, what they're doing against America, it's in slow motion, but we need to stop that first. That needs to be our focus: defending the Constitution, defending American values, defending democracy.
all right. So I'm going to push back on you a little bit here. So my question was, what are you going to do as senator to mend the partisan divide? And what I heard was all Republicans are bad.
Well,
I don't necessarily know if that's really solving the problem. I mean, you're a former Republican. You got to know Republicans that aren't part of that. I mean, you can't really believe that all Republicans are a threat to the Constitution. And do you really think that type of rhetoric is going to be like is really going to bring people to your side? If you got to convince Republicans to come to your side and vote for you, do you think calling all of them a threat to the Constitution is going to do that?
Well, all of them aren't a threat. All of them aren't a threat to the Constitution. But if they are going out of their way to not represent us, to just bow down and put everything into the president instead of representing their constituents, then we do need to call them out on that. Look, and as I said, we need to call out the far left as well. Um, that's important. But at the same time, we can't just cede our government to folks that want to torch the Constitution. And look, I don't think that focusing on social issues like we've done is healthy. We're so deeply focused on social issues, and one side thinks that you should think like them, and the other side thinks that everybody has to think like them. I want to
Mhm.
get the government back to serving the people and the concerns of the people. And so that's how I want to diffuse it. But at the same time, we do need to be aware in order to win Republicans over from the Republican Party, Republican voters, not officials, that, hey, y'all, this Republican Party, it's not the Republican Party of the past. This Republican Party, is not good on the Constitution. So I think that there's a way that we message to voters on this, but we shouldn't back off of the facts. We have to live in the world of facts. If we don't, then we're in trouble. And
So
right now, the fact is that the Republican Party, the folks in power, not the voters, um, have, to me, I feel like, and a lot of folks that I speak to, have abandoned the Constitution to push an agenda.
So you're talking about, the social issues, which you hit on, and I think you're right. This is something that both the Democratic and the Republican Party does, and it riles up the base. It drives voters to the ballot box, and it wins elections. Um, but and you talk about the extremes, right? I think you're hitting the nail on the head when you talk about the extremes. I don't necessarily, using the word Republican Party or Republicans. I don't necessarily hits it as fine detail. Like it's a little tiny. You're a construction, right? You got those big nails and you got those little nails, right? This is a little nail, okay? Because the government is made up of factions. And there's all these different factions that build coalitions that get things done in Congress. That's how things are supposed to work, at least. And again, to our point, here at No Cap Fund is the legislative body is too small, which means that a small faction could actually gain control of it. Madison warned about this in the Federalist Papers, and in Federalist number 10, he talks about how, faction is kind of it's a problem, but you can't eliminate faction. But the best way to remedy faction is by creating more factions. And so I think, maybe creating messaging where it's partnerships with Republicans, nice messaging with Republicans as opposed to, I get what you're saying. There are a group that don't really hold the same values, and I think that's on both sides. There are people in the Democratic Party and the people in the Republican Party that do not value the Constitution the way that they should value the Constitution. But I think we should come up with names for those groups and use those names for those specific groups of people and identify those people as opposed to using the broader context of Democrats and Republicans. And this will create a better atmosphere to build coalitions between the two major parties so we can actually get legislation done. What do you think about that?
I agree with that. How about we call them MAGA?
Well, what I would say to that is I think that you have to come up with a new term at this point, because a lot of people are so disenfranchised with the Democratic Party, and especially where I live, and I'm sure it's kind of the same where you are too, where they just like they don't want to support Trump, but at this point they're just like, I don't know what to do, and that guy sounds a little bit more like me than the other group does, and you guys talked about this. I know this is a little off topic, but in your space with you did a space with I think it was Terry Vitz who's running for Senate in Texas as well. And I think both of you guys are running, he's a Democrat as well, right?
Yeah.
And both of you guys mentioned the possibility of space for a pro-life Democrat, right? And that's one of those social issues that you kind of mentioned before where both parties says you have to do it this way or you're not part of the party anymore. And I think that's the type of thing that's the type of talk we need, right? Like we need to be able to talk about issues, very difficult issues and say, "Look, you don't own this stuff. We can see eye to eye on some things and not see eye to eye on other things, and we can open up and bring more people into the tent, if you will." What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, you look at Alabama and I think it's case we need to start looking at things state by state. And I think the problem that we have made over my life, especially with the internet and better communication, is we want to have this it's one exact brand, or that's the way people view it across the United States. And I think that as you talked about factions, that we do need to view things a little differently, and we do need to create space for people. But on those social issues, I'm staying away from the culture war. I'm focused on the fact that we're last place on everything, and the people here haven't been served for a very since I can remember. We need to get infrastructure built. We've had this bridge funding. I mean, the I-10 bridge down here, it's just horrible. We can't get it done, and a lot of it has to do with partisan politics, but and politics in general. But we've got to find a way to start getting away from these social issues to focus on the, as people say, kitchen table issues, which I never heard before I got into politics. But which that sure. So if folks don't know what that is, wages, or in this case, job opportunity in the state of Alabama. We need opportunity here. Finding ways to bring up the income in a state like Alabama or across the South where we have low income here. My personal belief, and I know this, I'm going to use this politically, is going to be try to bring in growth. Um, Instead, we've had these forces over time that try to come into power, and they try to keep folks out, keep folks away, and I don't believe in that. I don't believe in keeping other businesses out. I think that we should grow our economy down here and focus on issues like the economy, healthcare, and stuff that affects everyday people. Because right now you've got folks that they lose their homes because they get sick. People that work hard, they lose their homes. They get sick and they can't pay for it, and they lose everything. We need to find a path to a world where we're not in that place anymore, where we don't have folks, our neighbors, losing their homes because they're sick anymore. That's what we need to focus on.
Yeah, so I keep hearing I hear a little limited government from me, but I also hear a little big government. You kind of want to use government to solve some of the bigger problems, but you also want to limit what the government's doing in, the social issues and stuff like that. Kind of want to stay focused on, like what you keep saying is the people and what they're actually talking about, not necessarily what the candidates are riling them up about. So in one of those big issues we haven't talked about, and I think honest, it's part of the issue. And you mentioned healthcare, but it's also immigration, right? And so that brings us to our next issue, our next question, which is immigration is, in my opinion, it's kind of tearing us apart right now. ICE is using excessive forces in some case to remove illegals, but they're also detaining and harassing American citizens. Congress has failed to pass immigration reform for decades. It's impossible to properly apportion the House without having a naturalization process for who wants to come here. And for some background on that for the listeners is, we talk about this a lot on the show is the House is apportioned by the population. And historically, what led to the Civil War was it was slavery, right? But it was the fact that the slaves were counted as three-fifths a person. So the Southern Democrats were able to have an imbalance of representative power in Congress. This gave them extra influence in the executive branch in Congress. they were able to push their agenda to extend the Union, manifest destiny, which I think, overall, we needed to move west. But at the same time, they moved west for nefarious reasons. They wanted to extend slavery. They undid the Missouri Compromise. And so it was a problem. Ultimately, you know, when North and South came to blows, it wasn't necessarily because the North wanted to get rid of slavery. It was because the North was tired of the South controlling the government. Now, post Civil War, we fixed this problem with the 14th Amendment. We balanced representation. The freed people were now counted fully as one representative person in the government. They were given the right to vote. But a new power arose, and immigration became a big thing in the country. Corporations were able to bring in lots of people. Immigrants came from all over the world, mostly from Ireland, Germany, places like that, to come for jobs, right? Which was good. We were a burgeoning company. There was new opportunities here. It's the land of opportunity, right? But we never really solved this problem. We never really wrote effective rules for these people to come here and become American citizens so we can properly count for them in Congress. And I've written about this before. The Democratic Party, in a lot of ways, has, by inviting immigrants in as sanctuary cities, they're tipping the balance of representative power in certain states. That's what the Trump administration's fighting against. They tried to put the census question about citizenship in the first administration. And because they failed on this, now they're going full bully, trying to just remove everybody. Ultimately, I think what we really need is immigration reform. Republicans and Democrats need to come to the table. They need to recognize that we have this issue. It's humane on both parts because immigrants that are here illegally have to hide from the law regardless. They don't get to, maybe they're not paying their taxes, but they're also afraid to speak up if something bad happens to them. If their employer who is hiring them illegally does something wrong to them, they have no recourse. They can't go through the legal system. And I understand the Democrats' position of, protecting them and trying to help them, but if they really wanted to help them, they've got to write rules. So, with that long explanation, sorry, what would you do as senator to solve this very complex problem? What type of immigration policy are you going to try to advocate for? How are you going to get this done when you're in the Senate?
Well, look, I stand for real immigration reform. I've talked about this for a while. I've made a bunch of tweets of it about it. Even last year, we need immigration legislation. We have to have it. What they're doing right now is wrong. With these executive orders, we need to get legislation as soon as possible. But I believe in very strong borders. I think that we should have the strongest borders. But the people that are here right now, that are working, doing jobs that we don't have to replace, if they're not doing anything wrong, we need to find a common sense way to give them a path to citizenship. I think that that's fair. You got folks that do roofs that come off the roof and have blisters on their lips from the sun, and even then you look at the economic standpoint of things, and I'm giving you my perspective from someone from the South where we have an aging population, and there's not people that do these certain jobs.
Mm,
So let's say that a lot of these folks are doing a concrete job for a large contractor, and you've seen probably in the news a bunch of larger contractors have been getting shut down. Well, if you can't, your concrete's not poured, your electricians can't work, your plumbers can't work. You can't move on. Yeah, so it affects so many different parts. So we need to be really careful about what we do with immigration. We need to make sure that we understand that one, we're dealing with a human aspect of it. We need to treat people with respect. What they're doing with snatching people up off the street without due process, it's wrong. We need to make sure that when folks are detained, one, that we're not detaining American citizens without due process. Over in Baldwin County, Alabama, there's a man, he's been detained twice. He had a star ID from a private job site, without due process. It's wrong. It's unconstitutional. So, but we've got to figure out immigration legislation that strengthens our border, make sure that we have the folks here doing jobs that we don't have the people to do, that we just have a deficit of. And then the folks that are already here, we need to make sure that those folks, if they're doing the right thing, if they're working hard, that they have a shot at being a U.S. citizen too. I think it's the right thing to do, and it actually helps our country at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more on the, we gotta have strong borders. And that's something where, like the we can agree with Trump, right? It's like, yeah, we want to have strong borders. I don't necessarily know if building a giant wall was the way to make a strong border. Like we can disagree on that. We should be able to have a civil conversation about that and not just be yelled at and say that you're anti-American
Yeah,
at that
well,
point.
it's
And
2025 and technology is advancing. So let's think to the future instead of, 2000
right.
years ago.
I agree. So Will Hurd is a former congressman, and he was on a congressman on that long stretch of Texas that runs the border, and he has a lot of really great ideas. I think it's been a while since I've heard him speak on this, but yeah, I believe it was he wanted to spend a lot of money, or spend the money on some wall. Right, there's places where it'd be effective, but border patrol, drones, cameras, stuff like that would also be really helpful. And I think you hit the nail on the head again when you talk about labor. As a small business owner, I cannot tell you how hard it has been to find people to work, right? And I think I hear this from a lot of people, a lot of other small businesses, and also a lot of people that support Trump. Really, they're really not as native as you think. They really embrace immigration. They are not supportive of the sanctuary cities where people just flood in. They want a process. We talk about it's wrong for the Trump administration and ICE to rip people off the street without due process. But where's the process for bringing people in? Where's the process for vetting? Right. And so this isn't a problem that's new in America. We've had this problem before, and we had a solution for it. That book right behind me, it's called City of Dreams, documents basically the history of immigration in New York City. And, Ellis Island was a solution to that problem. Before Ellis Island, people would come in all different places. They'd be snatched up off the street. Maybe they'd be abducted, which we have that happening now, right? If you come into the country, you get smuggled in, but you don't know who you're getting smuggled by. So you might end up in a group of people that want to use you for things that you don't want to be used for. Um, and so we created back in the early 1900s, Ellis Island was the solution for that, right? It was a central point of authority where they created a process to vet people and bring people in. Now, there's always people can always disagree with what that process was back then, but overall, I think it was a pretty decent process for the time period. And I think that we might want to consider something like that now, like a little Ellis Island somewhere on the southern border, right? We carve out a little space for a facility that's large enough to house people for a brief amount of time that come in, and we have to write, like you said, we have to write actual legislation. So there has to be a reason that they're coming here. They've got to meet certain criterias to be here, and they need a pathway to become a citizen. Otherwise, that representation problem, that apportionment problem, that continues, right? They need to be vested. If you're going to be in America, you should be part of America. America is this idea of freedom, this idea that anyone from anywhere can come here and build something great. And America's done a great job of embracing that for a really long time. And I think we've kind of forgotten ourselves. So, what do you think about that as an idea, in the Senate, trying to sway your colleagues as you get there and be like, let's write some actual rules, but what do you think about creating a new Ellis Island?
I'd have to look into it, to be completely honest. So I don't want to give you an answer, without sort of thinking about it further. But that's
You're a true politician already. You've left the small business world and now you're a politician. No, it's fair. It's fair. You got to think about these things.
yeah. And so, I mean, it sounds like it could be potentially something that works, but we just I gotta think about it. Yeah, I mean, look, it starts with legislation, right? We need to get legislation through. In the past 2016, 2018, it was promised we were going to get something that was going to come through and it was going to fix the immigration problem. And I know a lot of people, believed it to be something else entirely in their heads. But,
Hmm.
what we got was a wall that wasn't paid for by Mexico, and no legislation. And so we need to get to the point. And I think, especially going through the Democratic Party, in tackling this through the Democratic Party is the route to go, to get to a point to where we can put together legislation that will solve this problem for the indefinite future because we need it. It's not right that we don't have this immigration legislation, as you said. You know, the folks that are here, the folks that are doing the hard work, they're already here and they're not doing anything wrong. You know, we need to make them a part, officially a part of our society. They need to be U.S. citizens. We need to find a way to make that happen. It's the, like I said, it's the right thing to do, and it's also you know, good for the economy. It's good for our country. It's good for them.
Yeah, I agree. It is definitely good for the economy, and I think you're right. The Democratic Party has an opportunity here to lead because, like I mentioned before, I think a lot of Trump voters aren't really hardcore supporters. They're just the other side is not doing anything better, right? And a lot of people are really in the middle on this. I mean, most of America are immigrants, right? Immigrants fought in the American Revolution. Immigrants fought in the Civil War. Immigrants fought in World War 2, 1, right? It's the history.
Yeah,
And you know, if we can bring common sense regulations or common sense legislation where we're actually putting an actual enforcement of the rules, we're keeping the people out that shouldn't be here, but we're creating a process for the good people to be here. I think that's something that's a winning a winning formula for Democrats or Republicans, and it's something that you can build a coalition around when you get into Congress to actually pass legislation. I know it's failed in the past, but people haven't tried recently, and I think we are at that point where I think the American people are just, they're over it. They're like, let's just solve this problem so we can move on to fighting about something else.
absolutely. It is time.
Absolutely. All right. So let's transition here a little bit. Last week, the administration conducted a strike off the coast of Venezuela. They killed four cartel members, allegedly trying to smuggle drugs, although I don't know if that's been confirmed. The administration says that we're in an armed conflict. So, my first question is, do you think that these strikes are legal? And what role does Congress play in this? And how would you handle this situation if you were in Congress?
So these strikes aren't legal. Uh, you know, most likely these folks on the boats were criminals, but we don't know that for sure. And you know, they're not enemy combatants. So if we can't, we should be, you know, arrested. If they're criminals, we should arrest them. They should be tried, and they should be appropriately punished instead of giving capital punishment without trial.
Mm.
And this just goes back to the current president has abandoned the Constitution. And you know, when you have a president abandon the Constitution like this, you this is we don't know what direction this is going to go in, how far this is going to go. You know, scary times for a lot of folks that care about these things and how far this could go. To where, as we were just talking about, they're already taking U.S. citizens without due process, detaining those folks, and you know now we're carrying out military strikes on people without due process, without trial. That's just an insane world that we're in right now. And that goes back to the tariffs and taking power back. Congress needs to take power back. Senate to gave up all their power. We need to take the power back. We need to use our platforms. Elected officials need to use their platforms. And now is a time that we can take it back because we have things like social media. These folks have these platforms where they can directly reach their constituents, and so they need to use the folks in Congress, folks in the Senate. Everybody needs to use every bit of power that they can, every tool that they can, you know, within the law, to reestablish control of this out of control government that we have, this extreme federal overreach. So,
So, so
yeah, yeah, go ahead.
let me your point about social media. What I'll say about that is there was a bipartisan effort of, I don't know, within the last I don't know, time seems to be, like, moving so fast. Let's say the last 10 years, it was Justin Amash and Abigail Spanberger. They had a bill trying to pull back and rein in the executive's authority on, war powers, and it didn't get through, and we had social media there, right? So, I don't necessarily know if that's the answer. I think, kinda back to what we were talking about before is, like, there's gotta be an education on this. It's two-way as Walter says, it's two-way education. That's what representation is. We need to explain to people how things should work, why they work, and why it's in their interest. Why is it in the American people's interest that that power is retained in Congress and not in the executive, right? If you're a Trump supporter,
Absolutely.
right? If you're a Trump supporter and you're cheering this right now, it just may think you might be in that boat one day. They might make a mistake, right? Like they might shoot the wrong boat, like there's got to be some sort of process. And then more than that, it's like, do you really think that Republicans are going to be in power forever again? Like, I mean, come on, power swings, all right? It's going to swing back at some point in time. And do you want, if you're a Republican or a Trump supporter, do you want President AOC to have that type of unlimited authority? I don't think you do. I mean, you probably don't want President AOC, but like, you also don't want whoever has the opposite letter next to their name to have that type of authority. And the best time to rein it in is when the person with the letter on that's the same as you next to their name is in power. That's the best time to pull that authority back. And for somebody like you running for Senate, again, I think as a former Republican, a blue collar guy, you might be able to bring some of those other Republicans to your side to say, "Hey, look, we don't really need to do this. We can rein this guy back in."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll push back on social media a little bit. As much as we might not like that people are glued to their screens, they are, especially now. And I think it is just snowballing. So I don't think that, for one, that's not a total fix, but you talk about education. That's one way that if we, take the effort to educate folks, to explain folks using our platforms, and that's everyone that feels that the Constitution is important. Then we're really gonna. I think that's gonna make a change, as well as being on the ground, as well as speaking, at events about this stuff, and even down to school. We need to talk to our educators and figure out what's going on.
Yeah. So next question here, it kind of is a little bit into this. It's still in the foreign policy world. The Secretary of War, that sounds weird, right? We haven't had a Secretary of War for a really long period of time. Pete Hegseth gathered the top military brass in Quantico to announce new military standards. He's been widely criticized for the delivery of the events, but in his book, The War on Warriors, he describes a military that has lost its focus, lowered its standards, and strayed from a system of advancement based on merit to one based on identity politics. With Russia at war with Ukraine, China gaining influence in Central America, what should be our focus in the military?
Number
And
one.
oh,
Oh,
sorry,
go ahead.
I
Yeah.
lost my spot there, but and does the show they put on raise the temperature for war already reverberating through the world?
Yeah. So the focus, number one, should be really restoring deterrence against Russia and what's going on, because that is out of control. We have, NATO countries being hit by drones, Russian drones. I mean, this is something that I haven't seen in my lifetime. And we gave some of that up. It should also be on deterring China, North Korea, and Iran. I think that's a no-brainer there that most folks agree on. The show that Hegseth is putting on, it's clownish and it makes us look weak. I think that a lot of folks, look at that, and I know I do. So I'm assuming many other countries are looking at that and just absolutely disturbed. Why we're basically attacking ourselves. Where it's like a MO of the Trump administration to attack, you know, Americans and our in our military, and to attack our alliances, and signal this, that we're not together, that we are divided. I think that is the wrong message. We need to signal that we're unified. And even in his case, if we're not, you don't take your cards and flip them over and lay them on the table and say, I mean, that's what we have right now. It's just it's sheer chaos, and I think that it's backed us into a corner. And that folks, we've lost that deterrent. We've lost it that we've had for so many years. So we'll see how they regain that. But I think that we should have coherent foreign policy right now more than ever, meaning that Democrats and Republicans get together and they decide this is how we're going to message. We're going to message strong. We're not going to be divided. We're going to show the world that, hey, this is America. We're back. When America is unified, no one can stop us. And right now, we're divided, and we're divided from our allies. So our posture needs to be that of being unified, being strong, being together, moving as one when it comes to foreign policy.
Yeah, so what I mean, I can agree with you on the show. I don't necessarily know if that's the best method. And in Hegseth's book, he talks about a personal story about him serving in the National Guard during the 2020 George Floyd riots. And he talks about him and his guardsmen being hurled racist insults at them and how they held together, they held the line, they kept their emotions in check, and they worked together as a team, right? And I think it's that quiet confidence that Hegseth's displayed during those riots that really should be on display now. The loud brashness at Quantico, I don't think serves the purpose that he really thinks it serves. Whether, maybe it's inexperience. He's a young guy. I don't necessarily know if he was, super qualified for the job. He doesn't have a lot of experience in this, although he does have a lot of military experience. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's Trump. Maybe it's the administration pushing him to do something like this. But let's agree on that, but let's dial into the standards. Do you think he's right? At the end of the day, like, if he would have done this quietly from behind the scenes and said, like, we need to fix some of these standards. We've gotten away from this. And in his book, he talks about the efficiencies of the integrated military, lowering the standards to fit different types of identity groups. Um, is it really the best thing? Because in overall, if it lowers the efficiency, then that means lives are at risk and American citizens are at risk. Should that be the thing? Should we be making sure we get certain groups into certain areas, or should we just set standards and say if you can beat them, you're there?
Look, I believe in fairness, okay? But this whole thing, it's just like the social issues. It's a giant distraction, especially as our military, advances. Um, it's a giant distraction. Now, I did hear that they took what they added some weightlifting into the APFT. I think uh, before this administration. So that was cool, that change to that. And I'm not against looking back at things and being critical, but we need to make sure that we have that we function always on facts and data. But like I said, to me, this is a part of the show. It's a part of the distraction. You can't talk about this. This goes on like we're attacking your own people when we need to be strong. If there are concerns, they do have facts and data to show that we have issues. They need to not make this a circus show, because what they're doing right now is making it a circus show. So I don't trust that it's even about what they say it's about. I think it's more the fact that they're incompetent.
Well, what I'll tell you is I've spoken to a number of servicemen, and they kind of feel the same way that Hexas does. And they do feel like the standards have been diminished, and they do need to be readjusted. And they also agree that the show is not conducive to making that happen because I think it's just like in anything. When you've got a rubber band, you pull hard, it's gonna snap back hard, right? And I think what Hegseth is doing here is he's pulling real hard at that rubber band, and it's gonna snap back. And I think that like I said, a calm confidence is better than brash insecurity. And you shouldn't be afraid to adjust the standards. You should be able to do it in a room with no television television cameras would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I just don't think that, what we're facing right now, I think it hurts us to even have this as a major conversation out in public. This is something that they need to uh, get a handle on. And really, like I said, my biggest concern is being divided at this time and showing division, or it shows weakness. And we need to show unity. That's
Mm.
what we need right now. We need unity, not just in the United States when it comes to foreign policy. We need unity with our partners over in Europe and across the globe, really, because we face some extreme threats that we haven't faced since I've been alive. So
Yeah, that is definitely true, and that's something that, we won't go into now, but I mean, I think it's a glaring concern that many Americans have is the temperature in geopolitics is hot. It is hotter than any time since the Cold War, in my opinion, and that is not really good. But let's get into the next question here. President Trump is sending in the National Guard into liberal cities, as he says, to clean up crime. And he's also suggested using them as a training ground for the military at that show we were just talking about. Um, California and Oregon, and I think Illinois now, I think I saw it just before we came on the show, are suing the administration for the use of the National Guard. Is this the type of dispute between states and federal government good? And what, if anything, should Congress do?
so the Congress envisioned by our founders, uh, they were given the power of the purse,
Which they're
would
not
and
using, by
should
the way.
prohibit the use of taxpayer money, for the deployment of American soldiers on American soil. And if it's not been requested, by the government of the states, then the president is acting like a dictator.
What about the Whiskey Rebellion? President George Washington rounded up some militia. He quelled an uprising.
Well,
And what
right
about
now we're in.
if the states are ignoring? What if the states? I mean, we watched the George Floyd protests. I mean, Trump is exaggerating things now, right? But there were times where things should have been done that states just let the cities burn. Like what if the governors aren't doing their jobs? Where does that authority transfer to? Should the executive branch or should the federal government step in, or should they just let the states figure it out? I mean, it's a hard question to answer because people's lives and businesses are at risk. But if you're a strict constitutionalist and you believe in federalism, you might want to just say, "I got to figure it out on my own. This is my turf. The federal government shouldn't be here."
Yeah, look, I'm going to point to we're in the year 2025, and this is where we're at. And we need to function as we are in the year 2025. And we have, issues with our government trampling on the Constitution. We need to make sure that we have folks that are in Washington, D.C., that are in Congress, that are in the Senate, that, you know, are concerned about this federal overreach. Um, this is federal overreach. It's too much. It's too much, and we don't have anything like that going on right now. You know, maybe there'll be some folks that protest. I don't know what they're doing right now because of a reaction to what the federal government is doing under Donald Trump, and what he's doing is trampling the Constitution. And maybe it's to see how far he can go. I don't know until there's some kind of legislative pushback or pushback, from our senators and from our representatives.
What do you think about what do you think about him using it in DC? That's a federal territory.
That's a tough spot. I think DC, for one, DC should be its own state. And you look at the folks in there. To me, this is the way I view it. I would say DC and Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has 2 million people there, and when they're 18 years old, just like folks in DC, they have to sign up for the draft. Okay, they should have representation. It's wrong that they don't have representation. But that being said, we need to get to that point first, and that's an argument for another day, unless you want to talk about that now. But my primary concern, though, when it comes to looking at statehood, you look at Puerto Rico, you got 2 million people there, and they have no representation, and so I know that it would upset the balance of things possibly, but it's wrong. It's wrong that they don't have representation.
I agree with you that. I think that if you're going to have a territory, you need, just like if you're going to have somebody come into the country, you got to provide them an opportunity to become an American. If you're going to acquire a territory, you have to provide that territory with a pathway to statehood. Because like you said, they don't like America is about freedom, right? And freedom is about having rights. And you don't really have rights if you don't have representation. Your rights is the first, like Walter likes to talk about all the time. The First Amendment to the Constitution was supposed to be a right of representation, guaranteeing a proper apportionment of 1 in 30,000 for the House of Representatives. It did not fully get ratified. It's still sitting there, right? And it could be ratified, but I think we're pretty far off from that. Um, and to your point about Puerto Rico, I mean, you've got a lot of Americans. I mean, they're Americans. They're not American citizens per se, but they are Americans. And I talk about it a lot on this. We have issues in this country because we haven't been doing our job. Congress isn't doing our job. We've mentioned it now. And we need to take up these issues like immigration, like citizenship, because immigration and citizenship are kind of tied together, and apportionment. All of those things are all intertwined together. They can all be taken care of with a couple of amendments to the Constitution to make sure that we don't, have these problems continue. And, a lot of people will say, well, that's hard. You can't amend the Constitution. It's too hard to amend. I think you're just living in learned helplessness, right? Like you just believe that because people have told you that and you haven't seen it happen in your lifetime. But if you pull out a timeline of America and you plot on that timeline all the constitutional amendments, what you'll realize is there are groups, gaps, and more groups. Okay. And we're sitting at the edge of a big gap, which just means it's the right time, you know? Um, all right. Last question. We're a little over, so I appreciate you sticking with me. Um, so National Review broke a big story this week about violent text from a
Mhm.
attorney general candidate in VA, where I live, Jay Jones. President Trump has repeatedly used violent rhetoric in his time in politics. Maybe not as violent as what Jay text. Uh, Political violence is on the rise. We saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk just a few weeks ago. It really has been disheartening for a lot of us out there. Is this type of behavior the type of behavior citizens should expect from their leaders?
No, this type of behavior, it shouldn't be accepted from any leaders on any side. It's flat out wrong. But look, as somebody that jumped into this because of seeing how rhetoric changed our society, um, this is something that falls back to 2016 and this kind of buildup. And I'm not taking away from, folks on the Democratic side that have said things that are bad like that. Completely wrong. We need to have people that are focused on issues and not ideology back in power, back representing people. We need folks that are focused on solving problems instead of pushing agendas that, quite frankly, on the fringes, nobody ends up wanting in the end. You look at the immigration policy and the immigration rhetoric, and you're not getting anything done. Didn't get anything done at all.
Well,
Instead,
so
we have,
well,
I mean, it did no legislation, right? I'm going to say no legislation. So it didn't get anything lasting done.
so
Um,
hold on. Let
yeah,
me let me let me butt in here for a second. One of the big, and you were with principles first. One of the big things that Republicans kind of left the party for was the behavior of Donald Trump. And
correct.
you know, one of my arguments are that I have made against other Republicans who have left the party is like you should kind of stick it out and hold your side accountable. right? Because if you don't hold your side accountable and you just leave and you go to the other side, then like where is the accountability? Who is going to hold them accountable? And I get the idea. I mean, the politics is multifaceted. There's an argument to be made that you just build a bigger group over here, but I don't hear Democrats coming out in droves, asking requesting that Jay Jones drop out of this race. But I know that a whole bunch of them did when Donald Trump had the Access Hollywood tape, right? There was a whole bunch, and even Republicans came out and asked Donald Trump to drop out. And I would argue that what Jay Jones said here is worse than what Donald Trump said in that Access Hollywood tape. Let me just read you some of these texts. If those guys die before me, I will go to their funerals and piss on their graves. Send them out awash in something. Then he goes on. He says, three people, two bullets. Gilbert, Hitler, and a pot. Gilbert gets two bullets to the head. He goes on talking about this is Todd Gilbert. I mean, he's pushed back on the person he's texting with here. And he says, I mean, do I think that Todd and Jennifer are evil and that they're breeding little fascists? Yes. I've told you this before. Only when people feel pain personally do they move on policy. Now, I wrote a piece in Vital Center a couple weeks ago talking about how JD Vance hosting the Charlie Kirk show missed an opportunity to lead and mend some of our broken political divide because he continued to perpetuate the permission structures that encourage political violence. This is that permission structure that encourages political violence. This is the type of stuff that when leaders say, people get hurt. You can go back to James Garfield, William McKinley, Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy. Like this type of rhetoric is dangerous. And I don't understand why Abigail Spanberger isn't calling for this guy to leave the ticket. I don't understand why anybody from the Democratic Party isn't trying to hold this guy accountable. If you went after Donald Trump for Access Hollywood, why are you not going after Jay Jones for this type of nonsense?
Completely wrong. It's wrong of anybody that's running for elected office or in elected office to be talking that way. You know, it's wrong. And like I said, it goes back to this system that we've put ourselves in, where we're obsessed with this ideology. It's either this way or the other way. And it's not. There's no ability to reconcile or whatever. Um, to where folks won't even eat with each other at dinner or at holidays anymore. This didn't happen before, right? And so, my goal is to serve the middle, to stay out of the culture war, to stay out of this whole, to me, two ends of authoritarianism, right? Where folks want to impose their will on the majority by using the government. I'm against authoritarianism. I'm against using strong ideology like that to drive your political positions. The government should be serving people. The government should be helping people. The government should not be taking away from people. The government should not be playing social experiment with our population whenever we have serious issues. We're so far behind our enemies like China. Like you look at shipbuilding, and there's an argument for we're moving away from certain things, but still, 5,000 ships, I think China's building for military a year. We're building like 3 to 5. Why? Because we're focused on the wrong things. And people are getting tired of it. People are waking up. People are coming to realize, man, we were promised all this stuff like lower grocery prices and, healthcare at one point, and all these folks promise all these things to us. Now they're talking about all this culture war stuff. They're pitting at each other. They're pitting us at each other's throats instead of trying to solve problems. So I want to change things by being focused on solving problems, the problems that affect the vast majority of people here in Alabama and people across America. Like the affordability crisis. What can we do? How can we help in a way that's not taking from people? That's not, overreach. How can we help foster the economy of the future to where we can get to the point to where healthcare is cheaper, to where we can get in more affordable, or to the point where everyone can afford it. So how do we get to that point to where, you know, our economy is strong enough to support our population? Because right now we are waning, we are contracting, we're losing our alliances, we're losing our partners, you know, and purchasing power of the folks here in America is being reduced. That is huge. That is huge. That's what we
So
need to be focused on. We don't need to be focused on culture war stuff, or ideology. We need to be focused on serving the people of America. We need to put all this fringe far left stuff down, all this fringe far right stuff down, and for at least a couple election cycles, let's work on making people's lives better.
so I I get what you're saying. So how are we going to get there if the people that are on the tickets are focused on the other side dying?
Well, for one, I'm not. And so, for one, we have to get people focused um, on our race here in Alabama, and maybe a couple other races as well, where we're not running a platform of ideology. We're not running this just basic, you know, common platform that you're seeing all across US on either side. We need to get specific to our states. We need to be able to, like in my case, you know, folks need to be looking at this and saying, you know what, I can do that too in my state. I can step up and I can try to represent the middle in my state. I can try to represent the common sense folks that are just so exhausted and terrified, really terrified of what's going on right now. The people that don't want to be involved, you're going to start to see get involved. So I believe this is the beginning of that. I think that you're going to see more regular people that didn't want to have anything to do with politics. It didn't wake up and say, oh, I want to be a senator. That were, you know, man, my community, my state, my country, I'm afraid, you know, for our future if we don't turn things around. I think you're going to see a lot more people step up and start to message, right? Which is serving the middle, serving the majority of people here in our country. Um,
I
it's
th-
it it's happening, and it's going to continue to happen.
I think the majority of people are outraged by these texts. I think the majority of people don't think that this guy should be running for office, and I think they're looking for leaders to step up and call him out. And you know,
Absolutely,
you
it's wrong. You know, they shouldn't be doing it. They shouldn't be saying anything like that. It's not.
so should he drop out?
If he said those things and he's wishing death on political opponents, yeah,
Good for you. I appreciate that answer. Um, yeah, I agree. And I think that, you know, if you're gonna call out somebody, you gotta be able to call out your team, you know, and hold your team accountable. That's how you get better, right? Like if you got a guy playing on the line and he's missing his block every time, you can't just ignore the fact that he's missing his block. You gotta call him out, help him make it better. And if he's not gonna do the job, you gotta sub him out. I don't know if you watch football, but I was watching the Commanders game this weekend and they had the left tackle. He was injured on the Chargers. He came in, he played 2 back-to-back plays. He had an illegal formation and a holding on 2 big plays for the Chargers, basically won the Commanders the game. I was super excited about it. Sorry, sidetrack there.
no,
Um,
no problem. Yeah,
so
look,
Kyle,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say thank you for coming on the show. I really
No
appreciate
problem.
it. Hel Share with the people where they can find you, how they can help your campaign. I know you're in Alabama. Do you have any events coming up? You got a website if you wanna share that before we get out of here?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can visit me on my website at www.kyleforalabama.com, FOR. You can also visit me across social media. My social media handles are Kyle for Alabama, and I'd really appreciate it if you would share things that you agree with that I post. That would be very helpful. You know, and as any campaign, we can't exist on thin air. So we need contributions to continue to move forward. We need contributions to continue to fight, to be able to purchase the things that we need to purchase, like campaign materials. And so I'd really appreciate that if you'd be so kind. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and to talk to you. And I just want to say again that, this is about representing folks that haven't been represented. This is about, in the state of Alabama, we live in a one party state. There is no other party there, essentially statewide. I mean, trying to find that math, trying to find a way, which we have the way to win in our state when no one else has put this effort in recently to try to reach across the aisle. This entire campaign is about bringing people over. It's about working together because there is no way you can win as a Democrat in the state of Alabama if you can't win over Republican voters. So this whole thing, I hope you watch it. I hope you all will stay involved. Is going to be about trying to find common ground so that we can start solving problems, that so that we can leave the world a better place than what we came into it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'd like you to consider, adding uncapping the House to your platform as you run for Senate. You talk about all the issues that you just talked about. Uncapping the House serves that purpose. It brings power back to people. It gives them an opportunity to compete in the sphere of power again, and I just think it's really important. For the listeners out there, you can go to our website, www.y435.org. You can sign up to volunteer. You can learn about representation. You can sign our declaration for representation, and you can even make a donation because let's face it, the most important thing in politics is money. And the second most important thing in politics is, I don't know, Mark Hanna. So, anyways, thank you, Kyle, for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I wish you the best of luck in your campaign. And yeah, peace, love, and representation.
Thank you. Have a good one.
So just hang on a second here, Kyle. So I stopped